In part 4 of Chapter 3 lab, we are going to install a radio server software on PCA. Then we are going to configure R1 to access this external radio server for user authentication. WinRadius is going to be used in this section. To start, restore R1 to its basic configuration. Then to test the connectivity, we ping PCC from PCA. This ping should be successful. If it's not, troubleshoot. The WinRadius server is already installed on the machines. Just right-click on the winradius.exe and choose Properties. Click on the Compatibility tab. Then you can choose the operating system you're running. And then click Apply and OK. You can also choose to run this program as an administrator every time you click on it. So again, going to Properties, Compatibility Mode, and Run as Administrator, Apply and OK. Right-click on the exe file, Run as Administrator, and click OK when it asks. If you run it for the first time, you get this message that you need to set up the ODBC or Open Database connectivity for the Radius database. So what you need to do, you need to go to the setting, choose Database from the main menu, and then configure ODBC automatically. Click OK, and you see a message asking you to restart the WinRadius to take the changes. Now you run it again and configure user and password on WinRadius server. So from the main menu, select Operation and add user. We create a user with username raduser and password raduserpass. So when we click OK, we should see a log message on the WinRadius telling us that the user has been created successfully. Now we clear the log by choosing the log clear from the main menu. Now to test the user, we open the WinRadius test, which is a utility included in the downloaded zip file. We choose the server or PCA IP address. The port is 1830, we leave it as the way it is. The secret is WinRadius, our user is raduser, and the password is raduserpass. We click send. You should see a message, a send access request message indicating the server at 192.168.1.3, port number 1813, received 44 hexadecimal characters. Now if you check the WinRadius exe logs, it says that the user raduser authenticate OK. Next, we are going to configure R1 AAA services, starting with enabling AAA, so AAA new model. Then we need to configure the default login authentication list. So AAA authentication login default. The first would be our group radius. So the group radius is going to take place first for authentication. If it fails, we put none for our backup. A better way to do it is to put a local authentication list, but for this lab we just use none. Then we need to specify a radius server. Our radius server is on PCA, so we start with the command radius server host and we put the IP address of PCA. Key, our key is win radius. This is the default NAS secret password, which we already configured on the radius server. To test the AAA radius configuration, first we ping PCA from R1 to make sure there is a connectivity between these two devices. And then if you open the WinRadius server or restart it, we need to create a user again. So we go to Operation, Add User, RAD User, and RAD User Pass. Then we click OK. And we clear the log so we can detect the new log messages easily. Now we go back to the router and try to log in and see if it's using the authentication on Radius server. So we exit to initial router screen and log in with the correct username and password. You can see that there is a delay here. The delay is because the authentication is going to be done through the Radius server and it's going to check its database. So the first time is going to have a delay, and it's quite significant. Exit to router initial screen again. This time to test the configuration, try to log in to the console of R1 using a non-existent username. For example, user 0102 and a password user 0102 pass. So even though you put the wrong username and password, you still get access to the router. The reason is because we had none at the end of our authentication list. So this is the one taking place. And it doesn't go through the Radius server. If we check the Radius server, there will be no logs there because this hasn't been checked with that type of authentication. To troubleshoot router to Radius server communication, first we check the default Cisco IOS Radius UDP port numbers used on R1 using the command Radius server host and the IP address of the host or server, which is our PCA 192.168.1.3. And then question mark. From the output, you can see that the UDP port for accounting is 1646 and for authorization is 1645. So if we use another command, show run and include the radius commands, we should be able to verify this outcome. So the authorization port 1645 and accounting port 1646. Now to check the default port number on WinRadius server on PCA, we go to Settings, System, and we can verify that the authorization port is 1812 and our accounting port is 1813. It used to be the same as the Cisco router, but because it conflicts with other services, the RFC decided to specify 1812 and 1813. We go back to router and try to configure these two ports, the new one 1812 and 1813 on R1. So first we need to remove the configuration, which is 1645 and 1646, and replace it with 1812 and 1813. Okay, now that we removed it, we are going to replace it with the new port number. To test the configuration, we log into the console on R1. So we first exit to initial screen, and then we log in with rad user and rad user pass. So under WinRadius server, you should be able to see user rad user authenticate OK. Now we exit the initial router screen again. This time we try the non-existent user. I just used user 0102 and user 0102 pass. This time the login failed. Then we go back to our WinRadius server and check what messages comes up in the log. So reason unknown username, and the message is user, for our case is user 0102, authenticate failed. You can also create an authentication method list for the unique purpose. For example, we are going to do that for the telnet access. So you can create a unique authentication method list only for telnet access to the router. So we log into the router, and we're going to config mode, and we create our list. The command is AAA authentication login, and the name of the list we are going to create. We call it telnet lines here. It helps to use the capital letters for the names so you can differentiate it between the commands and the names. So we use the group radius and nothing else. So there is no none or local. Now we need to apply this to the line VTY, which is the line for the telnet connection. So we go to line VTY04, login authentication, and the name of our list, telnet lines. Now we try to telnet from PCA to R1 and log in with first we log in with the username rad user and rad user pass, which is the correct username and password. This authentication should give us the access to the router, the telnet access to the router. Which it does. And you can see the authenticate OK message in the log window. Now we close it. This time we open another telnet session and try to log in using a bad user or non-existent user. So again, user 0102 and the user 0102 pass. Shouldn't give us the access because we only had group radius as our authentication method. This task is an optional task. It just shows you that you can actually use the CCP to configure AAA services on R1. To do this, first we go to router 1, make the connection, all the configuration required for running the CCP. So first we do the AAA new model to enable the AAA services, then IP HTTP server to have the web connection. And then we need a username admin privilege 15 secret Cisco 12345 use and IP HTTP authentication local. So this is basically a standard procedure to get CCP to work. If you done the previous step, to do this step you need to restore the R1 to its basic configuration because you already configured AAA on the router using the CLI before. Now we are using the CCP, so it should be restored to the default configuration again, or basic configuration. Now if you open the CCP on PCC this time, we put in the R1 IP address of 192.168.1.1 and enter admin in the username field and Cisco 12345 in the password field. It's a normal HTTP connection, so there is no need for secure connection. OK. And at the CCP dashboard, click Discover and let it discover. When it finishes this discovering, click on Configuration button at the top of the screen and choose Router AAA Server and Groups and Servers. In the AAA Server window, click Add. In the Add AAA Server window, verify the radius is the server type field. In the server IP or host field, enter the IP address of PCA 192.168.1.3 and change the authorization port to 1812 and the accounting port to 1813. Now check the configure key checkbox and enter win radius as a key. You need to enter it both in the new key and confirm key. Click OK. Deliver and OK again. Now to configure the R1 AAA login method list for radius, you click Configure, Router, AAA, Authentication Policies, and Login. You need to add, choose the first authentication method, radius, group radius, second authentication method, local, OK, deliver, and OK again. Now we are going to test the configuration. If you restart the Radius server, you need to create the user again. Otherwise, just telnet to R1 from PCA and use rad user and rad user pass. So the connection is successful and you get the message in WinRadius logging window.